This is Informer News, your voice of the people. Timeline is Sunday the 23rd of March 2014. Welcome along, my friends, to another edition of Informer News. Coming up in this week's broadcast, the secret space program, the greatest cover-up of all times, plus red alert warning that Yellowstone supervolcano could erupt at any moment, and how it would affect the Earth if this massive volcano exploded to life. Okay, into this week's news. This coming report confirms how close the United States is to Russia. They have been true allies for decades, from the Cold War years to present day. The United States and Russia, as well as other Western countries, have been involved in a secret space program for decades. The Russian and US, in a joint space mission using free energy flying saucers, landed on the planet Mars in the 1950s and on the Moon in the early 50s, and now both countries have joint bases on the planet Mars and the Moon. So what's going on in Ukraine? You would think by watching the Western media that World War III was about to begin. My friends, the United States and Russia are playing mind games with you all. If a global war does take place, it will be a false flag global war created by these close allies to eradicate large sections of the population as part of their Agenda 21 depopulation plan. Okay, into this report. This report originates from a moon-based greyfalcon.us titled Half a Century of the German Moon Base, 1942 to 1992. The Germans landed on the Moon as early as probably 1942, utilizing their large exoatmospheric rocket saucer of the Miethe and Schriever type. The Miethe rocket craft was built in diameters 15 and 50 meters, and the Schriever Walter turbine-powered craft was designed as an interplanetary exploration vehicle. It had a diameter of 60 meters, had 10 stories of crew compartments, and stood 45 meters high. In an extensive research of dissident American theories about the physical conditions on the Moon, I have proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that there is atmosphere, water and vegetation on the Moon, and that man does not need space suits to walk on the Moon. A pair of jeans, a pullover and sneakers are just about enough. Everything NASA's told the world about the Moon is a lie. It was done to keep the exclusivity of the club from joinings by the third world countries. All these physical conditions make it a lot more easier to build a moon base. Ever since their first day on landing on the Moon, the Germans started boring and tunneling under the surface, and by the end of the war there was a small Nazi research base on the Moon. The free energy tachyon drive craft of the Haunebu 1 and 2 type was used after 1944 to haul people, material and first robots to the construction site on the Moon. When Russians and Americans secretly landed jointly on the Moon in the early 50s with their own sources, they spent their first night there as guests of the Nazi underground base. In the 60s, a massive Russian-American base had been built on the Moon that now has a population of 40,000 people, as the rumour goes. After the end of the war in May 1945, the Germans continued their space efforts from their South Polar colony of New Swabaland. I have discovered a photograph of their underground space control centre there. Japanese wonder weaponry created in conjunction with Germany. A Bulgarian researcher, Vladimir Chazinski, investigated the German-Japanese space program and its connections with military technical collaboration. For example, he spoke about the Feisler Fi-103V1 and the Donia Do-335P fail, and the Japanese-developed Kawaiishi Bayaka suicidal pulse jet plane and the Kawaiishi J1W1 Shininden interceptor Foo Fighters football artifacts. These are remote-controlled spears which are sent against the enemy with supposed electromagnetic effects in aircraft or simple psychological weapons for frightening enemy pilots. Weapons identified as AEG Kullwaffen sent to Japan via submarine and long-range aircraft technology transfers. Several of the Kullwaffen are seen trailing Sally bombers, with the gunners making no attempt to shoot them down, suggesting they were being tested. Encountered in the Pacific after Germany surrendered, the 20th and 21st BGS reported these weapons in over 300 sightings. Disc-shaped or cylindrical air vehicles. Cylindrical or disc-shaped aircraft with advanced engines that Germany sent to Japan in the last days of the war, again by submarine technology transfer. Type of disc sent supposedly WNF fuel type. No Vril or Haunebu type would fit in any of the German submarines. And the Germans were not likely to share any of their occult SS E-1V technical branch knowledge, as those discs were being moved to South America and Base 211 in New Swabaland, Antarctica from March-April 1945 for continued post-war development. In the Antarctic area there was a supposed technical exchange of Japanese sub-type 1400/M6A1 Serian bombers with the Germans for other military technology that they gave to the Japanese. Base 211 was constructed between 1941 to 43 in the Muelig-Hoffmann Mountains, New Swabaland underground complex, with New Berlin as capital of surviving Reich led by SS General Hans Kemmler. There is ample evidence of construction of this base, with German surface raiders and U-boats making continued journeys to the South Atlantic. Argentina's Tierra del Fuego Fire Island and Antarctic waters, the Germans set up meteorological buoys and weather stations from Antarctica all the way up to the Patagonia region of Argentina. Gross Admiral Karl Donitz kept a large number of U-boats in the South Atlantic, despite the raging war in North Atlantic, and it was Donitz who became the second Führer of European Germany, New Swabaland, having never surrendered. Both the US and UK established presences in Antarctica during the war, and some Germans were captured on the Falkland Islands, Isle Malvinas. Argentina made their Antarctic claim the same year as Base 211 became operational, 1943, and aided the Nazis against US and some South American national pressure. In March of 1945, the US finally pressured Argentina to declare war on Germany and Japan, but to no avail. The Perón sheltered the Nazis and let Odessa ferret war criminals into Argentina post-war. Argentina naval records report unusual disc crafts operating off their coast during and after the war, before the US 1947 UFO sightings began, ironically where German weapons were being tested in New Mexico. Sonic wind and ray weapons. Other strange types of weapons use sounds, use the wind, or shot energy rays respectively. They are similar to the wind cannon, sound cannon. Plans over these artifacts, but no information exists indicating that any of these were constructed in the last days of the conflict. However, the captain of a U-977 that surrendered in Argentina months after Germany's capitulation revealed in his book U-977 that the Japanese delegations sent to Berlin observed the SS Death Rays crude microwave weapons in 1945. Japanese German space program. Supposedly Germany previously and during the war developed an SS space program, Rhone-Flug, which included specialists from the Japanese Army and Navy. No confirmation of this exists. Joint programs. Japanese-German lunar station Alpha 1, the alleged lunar base station constructed by the Nazis in 1943 to 1945. Japanese-German suicide space mission to the planet Mars in April-May of 1945, using the Haunebu 111 space vehicle modified with long-range capacity. With respect to all this, there exists only some reference or memories of some Japanese researchers who supposedly worked on some alignments over these technologies, but no real evidence about them exists. One of these references is about an ancient technician of the Mitsubishi company who remembers a strange cylindrical or spherical artifact acquired from a German submarine in the last days of the conflict. The Japanese army, one of these two examples very similar to the German Führerball objects, but found it very hard to operate. The Japanese were highly suspicious and could not conceive of the type of invisible propulsion system that these objects operated by. Subsequently, they were associated with demons and dynamited in a pit after Japan officially surrendered. Other references about these weapons are the encounters of a Japanese Navy Mitsubishi A6M0 with a disc over Germany, chosen and reported of B-29 pilots in Marianas and Japan, of some spears of light Foo Fighters in the last days of the war. Both Nakajima and Mitsubishi are suspected of having tried to construct purely Japanese discs during the war, exemplified by the 1942 Battle for LA disc that was fired upon to no effect. Recent analysis of the photos reveal a disc designed differently than that of the Germans. Same for the 1942 sighting of a strange disc over Hopin province in China. These supposed Japanese discs had one thing in common: they were quite slow and tended to fly in a straight flight path. German discs, by comparison, were running off powerful EMG engines capable of speeds of well over 7,000 kmh and were heat shielded by a metal called Victalin. Some call this frozen smoke. German and Japanese military R&D cooperation. According to Renato Vesco again, Germany was sharing a great deal of the advancing weaponry with their allies, the Italians, during the war. At the Fiat experimental facility at Lake Lagarda, a facility that fittingly bore the name of Air Marshal Hermann Göring. The Italians were experimenting with numerous advanced weapons, rockets and aeroplanes created in Germany. In a similar fashion, the Germans kept a close contact with the Japanese military establishment and were supplying it with many advanced weapons. I have discovered, for example, a photo of a copy of the manned version of the V1, the Reisenberg, produced in Japan by Mitsubishi. The best fighter in the world, the push-pull twin propeller Domineer 335, was duplicated at the Kawashima works. German radar station. A Japanese friend of mine in Los Angeles related to me the story of his friend's father, who worked as technician in an aircraft research bureau in Japan during the war. In July of 1945, 2.5 months after the war ended in Germany, a huge German transport submarine brought to Japan the latest of German inventions, two spherical wingless flying devices. The Japanese R&D team put the machines together following the German instructions, and there was something very bizarre and out-earthly standing in front of them, a ball-shaped flying device without wings or propellers, that nobody knew how it flew. The fuel was added. The start button of this unmanned machine was pressed and it disappeared with a roar and flames without a sign in the sky. The team never saw it again. The engineers were so frightened by the unexpected might of the machine that they promptly dynamited the second prototype and chose to forget the whole incident. German-Japanese flight to the moon and Mars in 1945 and 46. According to the author of an underground German documentary movie From the Full Society, the only produced craft of the Haunebu 3 type, the 74-meter diameter naval warfare dreadnought, was chosen for the most courageous mission of this whole century, the trip to Mars. The craft was a saucer shape, had the bigger Andromeda tachyon drives and was armed with 4 triple-gun turrets, all large naval caliber, 3 inverted upside down and attached to the underside of the craft, and the 4th on top of the crew compartments. A volunteer suicide crew of Germans and Japanese was chosen because everybody knew that this journey was a one-way journey with no return. The large intensity of the electromagnetic fields and the inferior quality of the metal alloy used then for the structural elements of the drive was causing the metal to fatigue and get very brittle only after a few months of work of the drive. The flight to Mars departed from Germany 1 month before the war ended, in April of 1945. It was probably a large crew numbering in the hundreds because of the low level of automation and electronic controls inside the saucer. Most of the systems of the craft had to be operated like those on a U-boat of the time manually, because the structurally weakened tachyon drives were not working with full power, and not all the time. The trip to Mars took almost 8 months to accomplish. An initial short thrust towards Mars was probably used to overcome the strong gravitational field close to Earth. After that, the craft was coasting for 8 months in an elliptical orbit to Mars, with its main drives turned off. Later trips to Mars by the joint Soviet-American craft in 1952 and by the Vatican craft of the Marconi project from Argentina in 1956 reached Mars in only 2 and 3 days, because their drives were working during the whole flight, accelerating in the first half and decelerating in the second. Smaller Kohler converted were probably used to power the systems and life-supporting equipment on board. I do not have any information at present time about any artificial gravity capability on board the crafts, but that could have been easily done with the large anti-gravity drives of the ship. After a heavy, almost crash landing, the saucer slammed to a stop, damaging irreparably its drives, but saving the crew. That happened in the middle of January of 1946. The crash landing on Mars was not only due to the crippled tachyon drives of the craft, it was also due to the smaller gravitational field of Mars generating less power for the tachyon drives, and also due to the thinner atmosphere on Mars that could not be used as effectively for air braking as the Earth's atmosphere could. The craft was shaped as a giant saucer, a form that is very efficient as an air brake when it is entering into the atmosphere, with its huge cross-section perpendicular to the trajectory of descent. One question that I have not answered yet in the affirmative is, how were the Germans able to regenerate the air inside the craft for 8 months for this big crew? Quite probably they were using advanced life support systems developed initially for their larger Walter turbine and free energy submarines that were cruising the oceans without resurfacing. The radio message with the mixed news was received by the German Underground Space Control Center in New Swabiland and by their research base on the Moon. This next report originates from the following sites: turnerradio.com and wmix.com.wordpress.com, titled More Yellowstone Warnings, and this was posted on February the 24th, 2014. February the 19th, 2014, TRN. Some worrying developments are taking place at the supervolcano located beneath Yellowstone National Park. The kind of developments that were seen shortly before other volcanoes erupted. Not only was there a sudden rise in the elevation of the ground and development of new cracks, but a gas called helium-4, a very rare type of helium, has begun coming out of the surface. It is the presence of this gas that has scientists quite concerned. If the Yellowstone supervolcano were to erupt, it would be 2,000 times bigger than the eruption of Mount St. Helens in the 1980s. Everything within 500 miles would be dead or destroyed within minutes. 2/3 of the entire United States would be covered in volcanic ash, and the climate of the entire planet will cool within a month. On top of that, Just this past week, the largest earthquake in the US took place just a few miles from Yellowstone, proving hot magma is on the move. Here's what has scientists concerned. Since late summer of 2013, the Yellowstone GPS network has tracked a small ground deformation episode in north-central Yellowstone National Park. During the past 5 months, the NRWY GPS station has recorded about 3.5 centimeters, that's 1.4 inches, of uplift. The ground is rising, and about 1 centimeter, 0.4 inches, of southeastward ground movements relative to a stable reference station north of the park. This final report originates from uwec.edu, titled Potential Volcanic Hazards. Hidden underground, powerful earthquake tectonics and hypothermal forces are continually reshaping the landscape of Yellowstone National Park. Evidence of these include numerous earthquakes, although not all are felt by humans. Uplifting and subsidence of the ground's surface, eventually the unrest will culminate in a large earthquake or volcanic eruption. Along with the earthquake threats Yellowstone faces on a daily basis, if ever there was a volcanic eruption the size of those in Yellowstone's history, the effects would be devastating for the United States, and it would affect the entire world. Such predictions are hard to envision, but with the ongoing activity geologists have been observing, we can only presume that Yellowstone will erupt once again. Volcanologists use two measures of eruption size, the magnitude of the eruption and the volume of mass of magma erupted, and the intensity, the rate of magma eruption. Magma is the hot, molten, often gas-laden rock material stored under the volcanoes. In principle, these two parameters are independent, but there is good evidence that they are linked. Thus, super eruptions are not only huge, high magnitude, but also very violent, high intensity. A super eruption has the potential to cover the United States in 3 feet of ash from a plume. Pyroclastic flow would engulf the greater part of 3 states, and there is evidence that the last major super eruption plunged the world into a freezing volcanic winter that lasted a decade. An eruption would devastate world agriculture, severely affect the distribution of food, and cause mass famine. Okay, my friends, you're all invited to join this channel by subscribing to End Times 23, which is a totally free subscription service. You're also invited to add me as a friend on Facebook and follow me on Twitter. If you'd like to drop me a line on my blog, by all means do so, or if you'd like to join one of my circles on Google+, all the links are under this video. All this week's news links can be found on my website, endtimes23.com. The link is under this video. Just click on the link and go to the top left hand corner of the opening page and click on the Informer News Links tab. You will find all this week's news links at the top of the page under this week's title video. Well, that's your lot for this week, my friends. I do hope you've enjoyed the show. I'll be back with you in a week's time with another edition of Cosmic News. So until then, this is your Informer signing off, friends. I'll see you on the flip side. titled Half a Century of the German Moon Base, 1942 to 1992. The Germans landed on the moon as early as probably 1942, utilizing their large exoatmospheric rocket saucer of the Miethe and Schriever type. The Miethe rocket craft was built in diameters 15 and 50 meters, and the Schriever Walter turbine-powered craft was designed as an interplanetary exploration vehicle. It had a diameter of 60 meters, had 10 stories of crew compartments, and stood 45 meters high. In an extensive research of dissident American theories about the physical conditions on the moon in the early 50s, and now both countries have joint bases on the planet Mars and the moon. So what's going on in Ukraine? You would think by watching the Western media that World War III was about to begin. My friends, the United States and Russia are playing mind games with you all. If a global war does take place, it will be a false flag global war created by these close allies to eradicate large sections of the population as part of their Agenda 21 depopulation plan. Okay, into this report. This report originates from a moon-based greyfalcon.us. This is Informer News, your voice of the people. Timeline is Sunday the 23rd of March 2014. Welcome along, my friends, to another edition of Informer News. Coming up in this week's broadcast, the secret space program, the greatest cover-up of all times. I have proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that there is atmosphere, water and vegetation on the moon, and that man does not need space suits to walk on the moon. A pair of jeans, a pullover and sneakers are just about enough. Everything NASA's told the world about the moon is a lie. It was done to keep the exclusivity of the club from joinings by the third world countries. All these physical conditions make it a lot more easier to build a moon base. Ever since their first day on landing on the moon, the Germans started boring and tunneling under the surface, and by the end of the war there was a small Nazi research base on the moon. The free energy tachyon drive craft plus red alert warning that Yellowstone supervolcano could erupt at any moment, and how it would affect the Earth if this massive volcano exploded to life. Okay, into this week's news. This coming report confirms how close the United States is to Russia. They have been true allies for decades, from the Cold War years to present day. The United States and Russia, as well as other Western countries, have been involved in a secret space program for decades. The Russian and US, in a joint space mission using free energy flying saucers, landed on the planet Mars in the 1950s and on the moon